The lifetime contribution of one of our community members, hopefully in recognition of the work that has been, that is ongoing, and that is still to come. And I'm going to invite Carolyn Turner, President of ILTA, and Mike Milanovic, Chief Executive of Cambridge ESOL, to come and present this award.
I'll go ahead and start. And I'd just like to say that Elana is actually, she doesn't really need an introduction, but in reality she deserves a long introduction. And she has been a valuable, very persistent voice in our field for so many years. She's served and been present in diverse forums. For example, she served as the ILTA president in 1999. And in the early ILTA days, I had the pleasure of working with her as a member at large on the ILTA board in 1994 and 95. All of her service and many of her accomplishments are written in the ILTA program, in the LTRC program, so you can certainly get all of the details there. But I would like to say that in my view, her biggest accomplishment, and something that certainly has influenced all of us, is her recognition of the power of tests and the many implications that are involved at all levels of their development. She does not and has not let us forget about the plight of the test taker and what is at stake for him or her. As president of ILTA, and on behalf of the executive board and all the ILTA members, it is my great pleasure to thank you, Elana, for all of your contributions and the many more that are to come. Thank you.
Just before we hand over this award, I'd just like to make a couple of comments from the perspective of Cambridge ESOL. You know how when people talk about where were you when, for those of you who are old enough, where were you when you heard that JFK was shot? Or these seminal events, you know? And I always think of Elana a bit like that too, because, you know, think about it, where were you when you first met Elana? Hands up if it was at LTRC. Not as many hands as I'd like to thank you both personally and on behalf of my organisation for your courage and for the fact that you speak out and you say the things that you believe, even if those things are not consistent with what other people believe at the time. So I think that is a really important thing to do, and of all the people that I know in our field, I think you're probably the person who speaks out most bravely, most courageously, most frankly about so many things that are really important. So on that note, I'd like to thank you on behalf of my organisation as well for your enormous contribution to our field. Thank you very much.
It's very touching and very compelling. I don't know what to say. You kind of think you're prepared for this because maybe it has to do a lot with all those years of being with a group of language testers. You become very tough after a while, especially somebody like me who started from day one, because I'm one of those who've been in the bedroom, in the famous bedroom. Right, socializing to the field of language testing and surrounded mostly by men, by tough men who compete with numbers, and you are there by yourself for so many years. So maybe that kind of makes you very tough, and as we were reminded last year, we're talking about 30 years of that. So 30 years don't go very easily. And there were difficult times, there were easy times, but basically I'm kind of surprised by this really support from everybody and the standing ovation. I never thought I'd get something like this from anybody ever. So that is something to write home about. And I must say, yes, I said it many, many times, and that this is like a family. I mean, the people here, it's kind of a dysfunctional family. Because you go through times where you hate them, you don't want to see them, leave them, you go to many, many other lands, you go to language policy, you go to linguistic landscape, you go to a variety of issues in social linguistics, and you say, I'm done with testing forever. And then somehow, you kind of draw back. And I never know, is it because I'm interested in testing, I'm interested in the people, because there's nobody better to laugh with than Anthony, for example, people like that. So it kind of helps you continue with life. And you find yourself getting a lifetime award in a place where you weren't even sure you want to be associated with. So kind of I respect the field in many ways, and especially this year getting this award, kind of thinking for many, many years I wasn't really sure that my work was really appreciated. I remember the first time I gave the paper on the power of test that Caroline just mentioned. And I remember resentment. I remember going to the backyard, in Finland, in Vaskola, and people whose name I'm not going to mention now, of course, because we want to be friends and family forever, right? We have to grow old together too. And I remember nobody's talking to me, nobody's speaking to me, and I was sure I was doing something very, very wrong. And this continued for some time, in fact. People didn't like the fact, for clear reasons, that you talk about testing in a negative way. Because after all, we are all testers. You cannot be critical on us. And as Alan Davis once said to me, Lana, why do you hate us so much? And it kind of reminded me of my mother, who every time I criticize the Israeli government, which as you can imagine I do quite often, I get, so why do you live here? I mean, if you're here, you should be loyal to the group. So for a long time I felt maybe that was the role I should have taken. So and then the turning point was when others such as Mary McWorthy and people in AAAL, and they said, you know, actually it's kind of not a bad idea. I mean, language testing can be good on one level, but on the other it may have some consequences. Power may play a role, there may be victims, there are people who don't really pass the test, what happens to them? Why don't you give a plenary about it for AAAL? Which I did, and that the world had changed from that point. So just to show you, to all of you, especially those of you who come up with ideas which are not very acceptable, ideas which many, many people don't like, stick to these ideas, go on with those, if you're sure they're very, very right. Even if your friends, your peer, even your own family, the testers, don't like it. Eventually, if you stick to it and you think it's right, it will be appreciated, and you may even get a lifetime achievement.